Hi there. So today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Gary McQuade, who is a director with Provide Consulting. So hi Gary, thanks for joining me. And first and foremost, please just do a brief introduction to Provide for those organisations that might not be familiar with the company.
Yeah, I mean, Provide Consulting is a digital and technology support partner. We work predominantly with service providers. We do some engagements with enterprises, but really what we're about providing the horsepower to deliver projects. So we are a resource consultancy. We put together rapid mobilization of delivery teams, be they digital, be they technology, and that would also encompass things like program and project management.
Okay, fantastic. So what I was hoping we could talk about today, Gary, is the opportunities and challenges that the industry is currently facing. So, we rounded up last year with phenomenal growth. So our research showed that the business services industry grew by about 8 to 9%. And the IT outsourcing industry grew by 20%. So, the industry finds itself on a very, very positive platform, and we deserve to be on that positive platform. It's the way that the industry responded to the pandemic, the way that partnerships around the world really, made things happen, didn't just keep the lights on, but kept the wheels of industry turning. It was a phenomenal response. And that has given organizations the appetite to do so many more projects, so much more digital transformation, so much more working into the cloud. So we're on this very positive trajectory, but obviously with that there does come some challenge. And at the moment, I believe the biggest challenge the industry has got is talent. We don't have enough skilled workers on across any part of the industry at the moment. So whether it's the buyers running the outsourcing programs, or it's the delivery teams in business services or in technology. So we've got this issue that we are growing. Everybody wants more business. Obviously, all the service providers want to grow their revenues, so they're taking this new business, but they don't have the talent necessarily to fulfill on that business. And one of the stats that we published at the end of last year was that wasn't our stat, but we published it. It was 43% of buyers are concerned whether their service providers are really ready to fulfill on the projects that they're taking on. So I'd really like to get your view. Are you seeing that? And if so, what can we as an industry do about it?
Well, we're definitely seeing it. I mean, there is a huge swathe of opportunity. You've hit the nail on the head. And I think, there are two parts to the way that we can sort of, dissect this. That the first is that I think there has to be greater responsibility on the client, really to apply some, I suppose, professional pressure on their service partner to understand the specifics of how they're likely to deliver the program of work or the project or the piece of work. And I think quite often when we look at the people element of that, the resourcing element, the talent element, it's often left to the back of the conversation. It isn't something that's front of house. It's a bit like an overlay afterwards. The important thing is, what are we trying to achieve here? What does the technology itself look like? What will the cost look like? And then the kind of the how around the people is left to the back end of the conversation. So, our view is that conversation needs to be happening much earlier in the cycle, because I think if it does, it will reduce the risk of the lack of confidence that you're reporting continuing. I think service providers now are recognizing that actually they're seeing that for themselves, and therefore what they are doing is, I think, being more flexible is the first word, and collaborative is the other word. More flexible and more collaborative about how they build that delivery capability, perhaps than they've been in the past. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is that, driven by the pandemic, there are lots and lots and lots of very, very capable individuals who have left much larger organizations and set up smaller boutique, highly innovative technology, digital, data, AI, all very current, very transformative type businesses. But they struggle to engage directly with larger enterprises. So what we're certainly seeing is more appetite from service providers to be able to collaborate, fold in, consume that capability, and present that as part of the service deliverable to the client. Because quite frankly, the client at the moment isn't geared up to procure the specialist service from the micro business or the boutique or the SME, however you want to phrase it. So, I've sort of packed a lot in there, but the bottom line is that really flexibility and collaboration are now emerging at a pace. I think traditional supply chain, where you engaged as a client with a service provider and the service provider said, thumbs up, yep, we're good to go, we'll get this delivered for you. Maybe we'll have to fold in some contractors here and there. I think what we're now seeing more and more often is that if you looked at the delivery mechanism within the supplier and you created a pie chart around that, I think there'd be a lot more slices in there. And it would go beyond just their own permanent staff and maybe some contractors. And that's to a degree where we fit in. And quite often we would be working with a service provider alongside their own resource capability, but also perhaps alongside a couple of other specialists that have also been folded into the deliverable. And the way that everything is geared up now from a technology point of view, hybrid, remote working, all of that is far more easy to deliver than it was even perhaps 2 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really exciting times, isn't it? If we can get this right. I'm an optimist. I'm sure we will get it right, but it is a very difficult piece, and I don't think we've got many great examples yet of how organisations have managed to get this right. But I've got one that I think has done this brilliantly, but they've done it as the end customer rather than as a service provider. So it's a bit of a poster child of mine, but GSK was the fifth in terms of world share, and they fell to ninth position. Obviously, that's a very dramatic fall. So they took a very detailed view as to what was causing that, and it was the fact that they were working with major service providers, just a couple of really big service provider arrangements, and they weren't flexible enough, they weren't agile enough, and that was actually inhibiting them to actually bring products to market as quickly as other more agile, digitally enabled organizations. So they basically did a full reinvention of themselves. And because they realized it was only the major service providers that would partner with them, because their RFPs took over 6 months, their contracts were over 140 pages, and they paid after 90 days, which is completely untenable for a small organization to be able to compete and do business that way. So as I say, they completely reinvented themselves. They now have an RFP has to happen within 6 weeks. Their contract's 4 pages, and they usually pay on day 14, if not on day 0, as a bit of a collaborative element. So that's one example that I can think of. I don't know if you've got any other examples, or whether you're seeing that sort of change of behaviour within the service providers to enable them to be able to do that sort of partnering.
Yeah, very, very much so. And in fact, I'm almost going to sort of play this back to you, because the best example that I can give actually came out of a discussion that I had at an event that the GSA put together a couple of years ago. And I was talking to a director of a very large service provider stroke systems integrator. The conversation was really around this point, collaboration, building a little bit more flexible capability into the delivery solution. And he pointed out that they were involved in a program. It was a 5-year piece of work with a client. And at the last check, they've got somewhere in the order of 250 boutique, micro, specialist partners that were part of the delivery solution. And what was even more interesting was that he reckoned that somewhere in the order of 40, 50, 60% of those small businesses actually weren't even in existence at the start of the contract. So, you know, these stories are great when you hear that end clients are being more flexible around the procurement piece, because that absolutely has to happen. But it's also great when you hear, you know, a lot of the traditional household names in the service provider world recognizing that they don't have all the answers, and recognizing actually that it might be more effective to plug in, you know, some expertise that they don't have. So I think, you know, the way that we slice the pie is changing quite dramatically. And, you know, the landscape's rife for that, isn't it? You know, there is huge opportunity. Everybody wants to be digital. Everybody wants to transform. And of course, now that we have this, you know, this whole sort of remote hybrid working model, you know, the world's everybody's oyster. So it's not going to stop, Kerry. And I think the work that the GSA are embarking on to try to, you know, promote a greater ease on the procurement side to allow these innovative, smaller players to, you know, move through the supply chain more rapidly, has to be admired. And in parallel, what's going on is service providers recognizing that they can draw, you know, some real quality in through that route. So I think if we came back and had this conversation, I'd like to think maybe in 12 months' time, I think it would have advanced at a you know, significant rate of knots.
I hope so, because the opportunity is phenomenal. So yeah, we're still seeing it that, you know, we co-founded and work on the Council for Supplier Diversity UK. We set that up in February 2021. And we know that the enterprise buyers really want to look at the diversity in their supply chain and actually have a lot more SMEs in their supply chain. But that said, they don't know how to find these good companies. You know, what's your advice on how organisations can best find these great new digital sort of startups to partner with?
I think it's nothing more than dialogue, if I'm being honest with you. You know, what you've got to do is you've got to be prepared to have conversations. And I think historically, certainly from, if we look at this, the start point of procurement, you know, if you're a small organization, the opportunity to have a conversation with a much larger organization was often very difficult to achieve. I think, you know, if larger enterprises are prepared to just open their thinking up a little bit more, I've used the word flexibility a couple of times, so I don't want to beat that to death, but I think to be prepared, not necessarily brave, but just be prepared to have some more open conversations and invite the dialogue. You know, talking and exploring isn't taking you to the stage where you're talking about any risk associated with engaging. What you're doing is you're trying to understand what's available to you, what's out there. And again, I think this is where, you know, an organization like the GSA features, you know, very prominently in that type of exercise, because your question was, how do you go about it? I think what you've got to do is you've got to identify communities where those types of smaller organizations are likely to be populated, and, you know, make yourself available, go network, engage and discuss. And I think also, you know, talking to larger service providers about, you know, the SME ecosystems that they're building around there. If you've got the right type of relationship with your service provider, and you should have, I think that's an open conversation that you can have. And again, a bit of a cliche, but we've used it for a long time. You know, how do you add value as a service provider? Well, for me, that's a great way of adding value, being able to have that type of supportive conversation to an enterprise, and maybe make some introductions, and, you know, just some signposting to suggest that they might want to have a conversation with companies A, B, and C.
So one of the conversations I've had in the past is that when an organisation finds a really cool new tech company, they then want to keep it for themselves and negotiate in some sort of exclusivity sort of provisions. Are you seeing that sort of behaviour across service providers? Is it a case that a big service provider finds a really cool hip company and won't let them really partner with anybody other than themselves.
Not to the extent perhaps than that you're maybe suggesting. I mean, I think we have to give credit to a lot of these SMEs. They've been set up and founded by very bright individuals. A lot of them have also got significant investment funding, and with that, that comes with some bright minds as well. And I don't think, in a lot of instances, as attractive as it might be to lock yourself in with player A at the expense of player B and C, I think more and more of these organizations have got the sort of the bright minds inside them, be they internal or through their funding partners, that would say, actually, we might want to put the brakes on this a little bit, because if we're not careful, we're just going to find ourselves locked in. So I'm not seeing that being played out perhaps in the way that you might suspect.
Good. And what about sort of like the acquisition trail then? Are service providers more likely to want to acquire these companies than partner with them, or do they seem quite happy partnering?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I mean, there are two ways that you're acquired as a bright young thing, as a business. One is that somebody looking in from the outside sees all the good work that you're doing and wants to court you. The other actually is that you come to the attention of your acquirer by being involved with them, doing some work with them. So I think it's a combination of both. I think that's to be expected if we're going to continue with this emergence of small technology companies. And the end game of a lot of these companies is actually to be acquired, but they want to do some good work before it gets to that point. So I think there's great opportunity here on a number of levels. One is for end enterprises to be able to consume some really clever capability and innovation. And that may well be through the partnering and collaborative routes that we've talked about. But I think also there's some great opportunity for these smaller boutique organizations to maybe move at a greater pace, perhaps, than might have been the case 3 or 4 years ago. And there's nothing wrong with using the collaborative route to get yourself where you need to be. I mean, most small businesses quite like the idea of having some pretty big logos, pinned on their jacket. So, yeah, as you say, it's exciting.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And the other approach that we're seeing for actually getting stuff done is the use of open talent platforms. So whether that is the enterprise customer using one directly, or whether it's through service providers. So we've said that we believe that open talent is going to be the biggest game changer the industry has seen. I don't know whether you share that view. What's your opinion, Gary?
I think the first thing is, I think more people need to understand that it exists, and they need to know what it is and what it can do, and then go and explore it. So I think there are two parts to this. There over time, this will play a larger part. I think it stands to be a part of the jigsaw puzzle. I don't think it's the silver bullet in its entirety, but I think it can be a pretty big piece of the jigsaw puzzle. But I think, again, I don't want to continue to butter up the GSA, but I think the work that you're doing and that you'll continue to do to give this airplay will be very valuable, because, like I say, the first thing is you have to understand that it's there. Then you have to understand what it is, and then you have to maybe explore whether or not it's going to be right for your organization. I think it can and it will probably form a part for a large majority of organizations. I'm not necessarily suggesting that everything that you need to achieve you can achieve through open talent, but I think it needs more airplay than it's got, and that's education, and that again, that's what you guys do so well. So yeah,
I think anybody that doesn't look at the open talent opportunities is being blindsided, really, because I think it's Gartner research that says by 2025, more than half of American workers are going to be self-employed. Now, obviously, the US is leading the charge, but I don't think the UK is that far behind. We hear about the Great Resignation. We've heard about, attrition rates and the fact that people, they don't want to go back to the office 5 days a week. They want to be able to carry on working from home, and perhaps, that working from home is actually working for themselves from any corner of the globe. So yeah, I think it's a really important area if organisations want to fulfil on all the projects they want to get done.
I think, I would say the creative and marketing sector has probably got a significant head start on technology. They've been doing this far more prevalently for far longer, and I think there's a greater understanding and acceptance now that that's part of what you look at when you're looking to solve whatever resource challenge you might have. And I think that's almost second nature now. Very few digital and creative marketing type businesses that you would have a conversation with about open talent might look at you and wonder what you're talking about. Most of them will understand it, will have used it, maybe not necessarily hired through it, but have actually used it as a vehicle to explore and try and understand. So yeah, I'm sure we'll get there, but I don't think we're marching at the same pace as those guys just yet.
Yeah, I don't think it will be long though that we don't actually call it open talent anymore. We just call it talent, and it's access to talent in any pocket of pocket or any corner of the globe, really. So again, another big change that is incredibly exciting. So I think one of the things you said right at the very beginning is that the buyers and the service providers need to be more aligned, don't they? They need to have mutually aligned objectives to really understand what the art of the possible is, but also what is realistic and what can really realistically be delivered. And I think they've got a joint responsibility here. It's not just the service provider that can be blamed for not delivering on time and budget, because if a buyer is asking them to do what is not really terribly feasible, the buyer has to take the responsibility there. What would you say to that?
I think it's just being prepared to have more grown-up conversations, Kerry. I think that the days of a very draconian, one-dimensional relationship from a buyer to a supplier, I mean, those days are long gone. And I think there's also a responsibility on service providers to offer education. Sounds a bit rich, but I think what service providers have got to be prepared to do to a point is to hold the arm of end hirers and just take them into some new thinking, and show them at your term the art of the possible. I think they could do themselves a lot of favors. I think there are a lot of clients out there that have a view that there are some pretty good organizations out there that we could be working with, and if we invite them in, they'll do a good job for us, we'll pay them for it, and everyone will go away happy. But whether or not there'll be a sense that they got really significant value from the relationship, well, that's another matter. So I think there's a big part that service providers can play, and I haven't met a service provider yet that doesn't like the idea that they can have something new and shiny in their pocket that they can bring out and share with a client. I mean, I would find that an exciting part of the conversation to be having with somebody, and even to be exploring how much the client understands about all of that and what they've done so far. So I think, bizarrely, the service providers can take the lead on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a really sort of like partnership, collaborative approach. So the closing remarks here, Gary. The industry is going to carry on growing like Topsy, I'm pretty certain. Opportunity is great. Any final comments on or words of warning, words of advice, what we need to do to ensure that we keep it going on this really positive trajectory?
I think what has to happen, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, is I think both within the service provider and the acquiring enterprise, I think talent and people have to be pushed further up the agenda. That has to be addressed earlier. even within the planning. You know, I haven't met an organization yet where, you know, they're going to spend, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even into the millions on technology, where they haven't done due diligence around, you know, what the outcome looks like, what the technology solution should consist of. And I think the same level of focus, due diligence, now needs to be played out around the, you know, the people element of whatever is going to be required, and also whatever is going to be delivered. So it's just pushing that further and further up the agenda, and not leaving it as a, you know, an adjunct that is fitted in afterwards, would be my march on Downing Street with a banner.
Okay, so final question for me is, where is this talent kind of coming from? Are we looking at going into different pools around the globe?
Yeah, I think we are. I think it's coming from all angles. I mean, I use the you know, the analogy of jigsaw, and I think it is like that. You know, something that I'm really delighted that I've seen a lot of lately is apprenticeships. You know, more and more service providers are, you know, taking on apprentices, and that's great. You know, we've been banging on for years now around the link between education and, you know, commerce, around technology, and bringing more people in, be they men, women, youngsters, whatever. So, you know, education has been, you're trying to deliver for a long time. What I'm now seeing is the word apprentice and apprenticeship used far more frequently. And I think that has to be a good thing. I mean, that's not necessarily the solution for now, but I think to a point, more organizations are prepared to allow apprentices, certainly within, you know, the technology and the digital arenas, to get more involved earlier on their learning journey than might have been the case, you know, 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that's important. So I think it comes from a variety of places. I think it comes bottom up, through education, through apprenticeships. I think it also, and I know that you're already onto this, I think it comes from redeployment, you know, from sectors and industries. I know you've picked up on, you know, accountancy as being, you know, one profession where automation is going to drive out, you know, the human, but, you know, the human is very well equipped. So, you know, cross training into other areas, I think, will be a big part of it. Open talent, you've already mentioned, and I think tapping into the community, the expanding community of micro businesses, you know, boutique businesses, call them what you will. You know, there's a lot of very skilled individuals in there, and whether or not you find a vehicle to hire them directly, or whether you do that through, you know, service partners, I think just being more flexible in your thinking will allow you a better opportunity to access talent, maybe that you wouldn't have been looking in the places where that talent might exist previously. And we as service providers, we play a part in that as well, in terms of educating.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. I see all of that, and I have a hope and a wish, and I believe this is definitely happening. Webhelp is a prime example of the use of impact workers. So I'm hoping that a lot of those apprenticeships will be given to impact workers, which are obviously disadvantaged individuals, you know, in all areas of the world. So yes, great opportunity, really exciting times. The industry is changing on a pin. So thank you very much for joining me, Gary. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully seeing you at an in-person GSA event soon.
Thank you, Kerry.